those bone figures. So for a total bone fracture risk, you are seeing a 40% increased risk for the vegans. That's total fractures, but it's when you're looking at those hip fractures that make up around 2 times. And this whole thing can be a little bit confusing because they did so many different models of looking at this. You know, ones where they adjusted for BMI, and then ones where they did that and adjusted for calcium, and then protein alone, and then calcium and protein together. So they had 5 models, all with different results. You know, after adjusting for all those things in Model 5, for example, the increased risk of all fractures for vegans goes down to 30%, which is a little bit more modest. And we have to touch on BMI right off the bat because it is such an important factor here. You might not know that having an increased BMI decreases the risk of getting bone fractures. This study emphasizes how big BMI here is. Middle-aged women under a BMI of 22 compared to those 22 to 24.9 had almost 40% more fractures. Perhaps more importantly, it also lessens the impact as padding the amount of force that is transferred from the icy sidewalk directly to your hip bone, for example. Same reason that there's a higher survival rate of car crashes for people who are obese. This doesn't apply to every fracture, though. For example, you don't have a lot of fat on your wrist no matter who you are, and so even when they didn't adjust for BMI, there was no real difference in wrist fractures for vegans and meat eaters. They did split things a lot of ways, and one of those was people below and above a BMI of 22.5. So it makes sense that for those vegans who were over that BMI of 22.5 compared to meat eaters also over a BMI of 22.5, there was no difference in fracture rate as P.19, and of course you have to be under P.10. And by the way, 22.5 isn't even overweight, that's just slightly past the middle line, higher than the middle line in the normal range. So for any vegan out there with a BMI of 22.5 or over, all of this information is just completely irrelevant for you. You're completely immune. What's my BMI? Oh, 22.4? Crap!
No, that his bones would inevitably shatter. Mike preemptively encased his body in a full body cast.
You can't get me fractures! You can't get me! But it is worth mentioning, in the other model where they stratified out BMI, like under 18.5, the next range up, the next range up, the next range up, they were able to find a difference even when they matched for that for vegans having higher fractures. And part of you wants to be like, okay, that's it, you know, BMI doesn't make all the difference, there's something else going on here, but I feel like it still might have made a little bit of a difference, especially when you read this quote from the study. Our interpretation is limited by the small numbers of cases in each stratum in these analyses, especially because of the strong correlation between diet groups and BMI, which results in a very few vegans in the higher BMI category and vice versa, comparatively small numbers of meat eaters with a low BMI. A quarter of these vegans were under a BMI of 20, so because of that crazy disparity in BMI and BMI distribution, they were having to do a really good job to make sure that everything matched up. Let's assume that they did, and let's move on. I'm going to talk about that non-dietary factor, which could explain it all, but first, there's one thing that vegans can do that would potentially really help here, and that is, of course, exercise. And exercise increases that bone density, which brings me very briefly to how that vegan fitness bundle is back. Strength training, in particular heavy weights, can do a really good job at increasing bone density, and we're talking about a ton of good material here. For $49, you get over $2,000 worth of material from a bunch of amazing people. Again, you get that Own Booty program, which is now the Own Booty program to prevent hip fractures. I'm totally joking. It's not. You just gotta work that side butt and you're good. I mean, if you can see it from the front, then you can see it from the... What? I'm told to stop talking about booties. Anyway, you've got a bunch of amazing recipes by athletes, nutritionists, meal plans, which are easy to follow, training programs with home workouts, key right now, yoga and mindfulness programs, which is a little extra key right now. I think we can all use a little bit of mindfulness. And over 2,300 trees, boom, there's the certification, and now they're doing 10 trees per order. So honestly, even if you're just trying to offset carbon and not get ripped, you can just get this. All right, back to the bones. Now for that non-dietary factor that I believe could explain this, and that is totally out of left field. Breastfeeding. No, this is going to make sense. It's going to make a lot of sense. We're talking a study that is nearly 80% women. And I noticed something was going on when I looked at the two groups and saw a massive disparity in which the meat eaters had a 75% rate of parenthood, while the vegan group only had a 34% rate. Yeah, the vegans were a bit younger, so that could have increased over time, but because the average age was nearly 40, it was unlikely to ever get near catching up. And here's where it gets interesting. For whatever reason, maybe it's a metabolic mechanism, women who have breastfed have a much lower rate of hip fractures. From this study, which was also from a northern climate, breastfeeding mothers had half, I repeat, half the hip fracture risk after menopause later in life. This is super fascinating. The one potential explanation that would throw